A planting plan is a detailed drawing showing species type, quantities, and locations for all the plants that you want to include in your garden. And this is used to direct us when we go to plant later on. In our last video, we created the site layout plan to make sure that we met all of our garden goals, and in this video, we'll match plants to each garden area. Once we select our plants for each area, we'll draw them into scale, label them, and finally create a master plant list with quantities and species that we will use to order our plants. If you'll remember, I said that making the design layout that we made in the last video is kind of like writing a story with a bunch of possible outcomes. Making your planting plan, on the other hand, is a bit more like solving a puzzle. There's still a lot of different choices in terms of plants you choose, but you now have a really good idea of what sorts of qualities you're looking for in each section of the garden, and that would include things like bloom time, height, and color. You can find information about the site conditions and plant characteristics for over 100 different native Ontario species on our shop page on our website, and you can also check out our plant catalogs under the Resources tab. Throughout the plant selection process, remember to look for plants that are hardy to the zone you're located in, and don't forget about your site-specific conditions. Keep your site conditions map and design layout on hand to reference. The design layout is what will really help direct the locations of your plants. In the last video I mentioned making photocopies of the blank layout before you put notes on it, and this is what we use in this video to draw the plants over top of. Doing it this way will really help keep the integrity of our design. There are different ways of approaching designing a planting plan, but the way that I like to do it is by first selecting those plants that provide structure and texture to the garden, and then adding in my flowers afterwards. Now before we walk through that process, I just want to give you a note on how to scale your plants and draw them into scale on the base plan, because this will be important in terms of calculating how many plants you need for the space. This stage is where having a scaled base plan is really useful. As I select plants, I can draw them in at scale according to their mature spread. For example, in the last video I added in 2 statement shrubs, and we'll walk through this hibiscus as an example. I looked up its spread on our website, and the mature spread is about 3 feet or 36 inches wide at maturity. I know that our scale is 1 inch equals 24 inches, so I'm going to divide 36 by 24 just like I did when we were creating our base plan. And this gives me 1.5. So I know that I'm going to be drawing in the hibiscus at 1.5 inches on our piece of paper. This is the same process that we will use throughout the creation of our planting plan, and in the end what it will give us is a scaled drawing with accurately spaced plants that we can use to count our final quantities from.
Different plants will play different roles in your garden. You can think of a garden as a house that's made up of a structural frame, walls and paint, and decor. Each contributes to the overall feeling of the house. Woody species are like the house's structural building framework. If you have the space for them, these plants will provide year-round structure. Grasses, sedges, and ferns, which may or may not be visible in all 4 seasons, are like painted walls that create a canvas to decorate. Flowering perennial plants like wildflowers create thematic interest just as furniture, pictures, and pillows do in a house. A great beginner approach to creating a planting plan is by first selecting woody species, then grasses and ferns, and then wildflowers.
Now before I add in my wildflower species that will make up the bulk of this garden, I really want to build the structure of the garden by adding some more woody species in addition to these 2 that I already decided on. I'll also add some grasses and ferns, and throughout this I particularly want to think about the balance of the garden. I've selected 2 more shrub species, and I'm going to incorporate these 2 new groupings into the drawing. I've selected purple flowering raspberry for the back of the garden, which will create a nice green backdrop behind all of the other plantings. And I've also chosen pot of gold for the front. It's got nice low mounding forms that will balance out the flowering dogwood nicely. Next, I've gone ahead and added in grasses, sedges, and ferns. These provide additional structure as well as texture and height. Again, think about how to balance out your plan. Also consider how the different plants will look as you walk through or past the garden. In general, taller plants should go toward the back and shorter toward the front. Some of our native grasses can get quite large, so take this into account if you're including them in your plan.
Notice that I've started to use some different colors and shapes to represent the different grasses, sedges, and ferns at this stage of the drawing. I'm doing this to help me remember what kind of texture each one is providing to the garden. You don't have to do this by any means, but it does help to differentiate between the different species going forward as well.
By selecting these very green species first, I'm making sure that I incorporate some harmony into the garden. If you'll remember, harmony and contrast were two of the principles that we mentioned in the last video, where harmony involves things that are similar, contrast involves things that are different. So the harmonious shades of green will provide a really good base on which I can add the contrasting blooms that I'll add in the next step. The bulk of my garden is going to be made up of wildflowers, so once I've established the foundational shrubs and other structural plants, I'll start a list of possible flowers for each remaining planting area. Create this list by matching plants to the qualities and conditions you identified for each planting area on your design layout. Jot plant options down on this design layout or on a separate piece of paper. Once you have worked your way through and made a list of possible flowers for each area, start to look at how some of them might work together to contribute to meeting your overall goals. For example, if your garden has a color scheme or you want 3-season blooms, this will help you to narrow down your list across the planting area. Then you can go through and cross off plants that you're not going to include. You will end up with one plant per planting area for clumped plantings or for mixed areas like we have on part of our drawing here. You will end up with a few species for each area. Once you've narrowed down your selections for each planting area, it's a good idea to put everything together into a list. You can add further information for your own benefit, like I have here, such as bloom times and spread, and this will be good when you go to order. You can also use this as a checklist at the planting stage to make sure you have everything. Now that I know which species I'm including in each planting area, all I need to do is use the mature spread and my scale to once again draw each plant onto my scaled base plan. For example, I know that the spread of both of my lobelia species here are about 1.5 feet or 18 inches. If I divide 18 by 24, my scale, I get 0.75 inches on paper. I like to just draw my wildflowers in as circles, so I have drawn those in as 3/4 inch diameter circles on the paper. If you want a dense planting, draw the plants touching each other. For a more sparse planting, leave space in between them. To simplify your drawing, you can bubble off around the outside of a group of plants if they're all the same species, erase the inner lines, and make a note of species and quantity. I've done so here for Caltha palustris or marsh marigold. You can see in our final planting plan here, I've used a combination of bubbling off groups and drawing individual plants. Where individual plants are drawn, I've connected plants that are the same species with a line and labeled them with their name. You can double check that your planting plan meets your goals by checking things like bloom time and height. Here, for example, I've made a copy of my plan and colored in the different bloom times to make sure that I have blooms from spring right through to fall. Finally, we can make a list of plant quantities. By drawing plants into scale at the density I desire, all I need to do to determine my final quantities to order is to count the number of each species on the plan and record it. Once I have this finalized list, I can go ahead and order my plants.